The legendary Sword Saint, reborn into a new era, is destined to reclaim the peak. Non-stop action, pure hype. A story of hiding true power every turn. The human-to-demon war of the previous life. 6 demon dragons led countless monsters in a relentless assault. Casualties were devastating. 9 out of 10 bases collapsed, and the front lines crumbled one after another. The last of the 6, the Black Dragon, bared its fangs and vowed to wipe out every last human. The words barely left its mouth before the Black Dragon unleashed a terrifying skill, and destructive energy swept across the land. A shadow of despair fell over the world. Humanity seemed destined for extinction. At that last critical moment, I appeared on the battlefield. Having already slain 5 of the demon dragons, I read the Black Dragon's move and blocked its killing blow, holding the last thin line of hope for humanity. A wave of gasps erupted from the crowd as they recognized my silhouette. I, the Sword Saint, slowly raised a hand and apologized for arriving late. I told them to leave everything that followed to me. Fragments of the past flashed through my mind. It all began when gates to another dimension suddenly appeared all over the world. To fight the monsters pouring out of those gates, and the 6 powerful demon dragons commanding them, humanity poured everything it had into the struggle. We studied the unknown mana the monsters wielded, and forced that power to serve us, building a line of resistance. But the demon dragons far exceeded our worst expectations. Devastating losses piled up one after another, and humanity was pushed to the very edge of extinction. Then my pink-haired companion rushed onto the battlefield. She understood what my arrival meant. The other 5 demon dragons had already been defeated. Only the Black Dragon remained. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face, and told me everything. The others had pushed their mana and strength to the limit, and died fighting. Now, all of humanity's last hope rested on me alone. The Black Dragon let out a scornful laugh and admitted I had some skill to have beaten the others, but it declared itself the strongest of the 6 dragons, and mocked me for daring to challenge it with nothing but a sword. I met its gaze and made my promise. I would kill the Black Dragon. With those words spoken, I felt the terrifying mana churning from the Black Dragon's body, and behind me I could hear my companions placing their last desperate trust in me. I gripped my sword tight and silently recited the essence of my technique, drawing the boundless mana in the air into the blade. Ready. I exhaled sharply and declared I was going in. The Black Dragon sneered and called me a fool. The next second, it activated its skill. Destructive energy came crashing down from all directions, determined to annihilate every last one of us. Without a moment's hesitation, I pushed off the ground and leapt. I shot through the energy storm like an arrow. In an instant, I closed the distance and appeared right before it. Then I unleashed the Thunder God's 8-sword style. A blinding flash of light exploded outward, swallowing the entire battlefield. Every witness froze in shock, holding their breath for the outcome. When the light faded, blood was slowly seeping from the Black Dragon's massive body. A flicker of disbelief crossed the Black Dragon's eyes. It acknowledged that I was unlike any human it had faced before. No one had ever taken its attack head-on, let alone landed a wound. Then it surged with terrifying mana again, ready to crush this unexpected threat. The shockwave tore through the surroundings, and buildings along the way collapsed on impact. In that desperate moment, my pink-haired companion activated a defensive spell and threw up a barrier to protect the others. I felt the raw, overwhelming force behind the Black Dragon's strike. It shook me to the core. Was this power, this crushing pressure, was this its full strength? If so, I had no room left to hold back. I had to bet everything. I made my decision to use the 8-sword style's ultimate technique and face the Black Dragon in a final showdown. I drew a deep breath and channeled every ounce of mana and strength in my body into the blade. With the resolve of someone who had nothing left to lose, I charged at the Black Dragon. The moment I moved, I launched into a furious assault. An earth-shaking clash erupted. Watching from the side, my pink-haired companion felt her heart seize. The technique I was using was a forbidden ultimate, one that burned away my own life force to activate. After a brief moment of shock, her eyes hardened with absolute resolve. She chose to support my decision completely. Even the Black Dragon was rattled by my ultimate technique, and its attack slowed. But in its eyes, what I was doing was nothing short of stupidity. I seized that split-second opening and pushed my output even harder. A blazing golden light radiated from my entire body. The Black Dragon could not understand why I would throw away any chance of survival for the sake of emotion. It sneered again. Humans were nothing but insects, too weak to be worth a second thought. With a furious roar, it launched a far more violent attack, the mana surge far exceeding anything it had thrown at me. I tracked the Black Dragon's attack trajectory, and my mind made the call in an instant. This strike was too powerful. If I dodged, everyone behind me would be finished. There was no way out. The only option left was to meet it with my life on the line. I called out to my pink-haired companion, thanking her for fighting by my side all these years, and with quiet guilt, I asked her to carry the burden of protecting humanity alone from now on. By then, the Black Dragon's skill was already bearing down on me. I pushed myself into my maximum state with everything I had. I told myself, this one strike would end this endless nightmare. I gripped the blade with both hands and unleashed the 8-sword style at full power. Charging headfirst into the Black Dragon's destructive attack, I didn't flinch for even a second. Two forces of absolute power collided head-on. The impact detonated with a deafening roar. Through the chaos, the Black Dragon's face was frozen in utter disbelief. I clenched my teeth and held on with every last scrap of strength I had. The next moment, the Black Dragon let out a howl of agony as golden light erupted and scattered across its body. I stared at the Black Dragon as its massive frame swayed before before me. A quiet relief washed over me. In this fight to the death, I had come out on top. The thought barely finished before the black dragon crashed to the ground and went still. My pink-haired companion saw it happen and came sprinting toward me. I couldn't hold on any longer. My body gave out and I fell. She moved fast, catching me before I hit the ground. She held my battered body carefully in her arms. I forced my voice out, delivering the news of victory to everyone around me. The black dragon's core had been shattered. It would never rise again. The moment those words left my mouth, cheers erupted all around, the cry of people who had survived the impossible. Hearing those voices rise and fall around me, I felt a warmth I couldn't put into words. My pink-haired companion immediately activated a healing spell and poured everything into treating my wounds. Then, without warning, the black dragon's voice echoed inside my head, calling me pitiful. I froze. This was a telepathic message meant only for me. The black dragon's voice pressed on, cold and direct. Their core plan had never changed. They would awaken the most powerful of all, the divine dragon, and the conditions for that awakening had already been met. Defeating the 6 dragons had solved nothing. Under the divine dragon's blessing, all 6 of them would return in 100 years. In other words, every one of my 6 brutal battles had been meaningless from start to finish. I desperately tried to call out and demand answers, but my broken body refused to respond. At the same time, my pink-haired companion's frantic voice reached me. She couldn't stop my wounds from worsening no matter what she tried. My consciousness was fading fast. I screamed inside my own mind, "Please, anyone, give me one more chance." My fight was not over. I could not die here with so much left undone. What remained of my will struggled against the void. A single point of light fell from deep within my fading consciousness. It drifted downward along an invisible path, piercing through layer after layer of time and space, until at last it landed on a golden wheel of fate, suspended in the dark. An unfamiliar voice broke through the endless darkness. It said my vital signs had returned to normal, and my consciousness had successfully stabilized. It asked me to wait. The attending doctor would be here shortly. I opened my eyes again. The noise around me was overwhelming. I scanned the room. Nothing but strange, unfamiliar equipment. Was this a hospital? On a nearby television, a special documentary was playing, a centennial commemoration marking the end of the 6 Dragons War. The broadcast mentioned that this year marked the 100th anniversary of the peace that the Sword Saint and the 4 great heroes had protected. I was stunned. I couldn't make sense of any of it, but there was no mistaking it. This was a miraculous second chance given by fate itself. I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in a mirror nearby. This young, unfamiliar face staring back at me. This must be what they called reincarnation. At that moment, a breaking news alert cut across the broadcast. Reports indicated that over 50 gate activations had already been recorded that day, with multiple mana earthquakes occurring across different regions. Many civilians speculated it was a sign that the 6 dragons were reviving, and the Mage Guild announced it would raise its alert level. It hit me then, the Black Dragon's words that had echoed in my mind before. Under the Divine Dragon's blessing, the 6 dragons would return in 100 years. Could it be? Had the 6 dragons already begun to awaken? If so, the Divine Dragon's revival might not be far behind. The Demon Dragon's scheme would not succeed. I would stop the Divine Dragon from awakening. After checking out of the hospital, the first thing I did was look into the background of this body. The original owner was a student at a mage academy. He had lost both parents when he was very young and had no one to rely on. Because of that, he had always lived alone. Still, this name was a little too close to my own for coincidence. I turned my gaze to a can sitting on the desk. I decided to test whether my mana was still intact. I drew the sword at my side and gave it a light swing. Then I snapped it back into the sheath in one fluid motion. Almost the instant the blade returned, the can on the desk exploded apart. Shards scattered across the surface, covering the entire desk. Good. That settled it. My mana was still there. For now, I would live in this era as a student and see how things unfolded. I slung my bag over my shoulder and headed to school. On the way, the news was still running. A reporter was pressing a Mage Guild official for answers about the gates becoming active again and the rising number of monsters. The official stated that S rank and above elite hunters had already been deployed across the regions to maintain order, and a full investigation into the stronger monsters was underway. Not bad, I thought. At least the guild in this era knows how to move fast. Even so, before I could get a handle on the enemy's movements, I couldn't walk into the guild and explain who I was. Doing that would alert the 6 dragons to my presence. Before long, I arrived at the Mage Academy, a school built specifically for guild candidate students. It was a prime location for gathering intelligence, and with luck, a way to build connections with the guild and its higher-ranked members. More importantly, to stand against enemies as powerful as the 6 dragons and the Divine Dragon, I needed allies who were strong enough to matter. If I came across any students with real ability here, it wouldn't be too late to open up about my past then. As I walked past the main building, one of the classrooms was in the middle of a mana test. I stopped and watched. The teacher praised the students' progress and said they now had a real shot at advancing to B rank. The student beamed with excitement and thanked the teacher. That one moment made me freeze. I looked at the students in front of me. Every spell they cast was pitifully weak. Was this really the average standard of mages in this era? What surprised me even more was how proud they all seemed about it. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Was there anyone strong enough here to be worth fighting beside? I turned away and went looking for my own classroom. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. For now, the priority was to get a clear picture of where this body stood. The moment I stepped in, a red-haired delinquent slouched over and stood started talking at me. He got up and sauntered right into my face. He announced loudly that I had been in the hospital for a whole month, and during that time, they hadn't found any new entertainment. The entire classroom went rigid. Not a single student dared to breathe. For a second, I nearly thought my true identity had been exposed. I steadied myself and played the part of the original owner. I pretended to be confused and said that being hospitalized had left me a bit hazy on who they were. That was all it took. The red-haired delinquent snapped, stepped forward, and grabbed me by the collar. He called me a worthless F-rank trash who thought he was better than everyone, and reminded me he was an A-rank. Then he kicked me across the room. I hit the ground hard, and a dull pain spread through my body. He stood over me and called me the dead last of the dead lasts, said a small fry like me deserved to be pushed around. Then I heard someone in the crowd mutter that even a rank was just candidate level. Someone else whispered to a friend to stay out of it and just let it happen. The red-haired delinquent swept a glance across them, then fixed his eyes back on me. He noticed the sword hanging at my side. He mocked me for carrying such an outdated weapon, said it suited a permanent dead last perfectly. He kept twisting the knife, saying I could never become a hero like the Sword Saint. We only shared a similar name and nothing more. That was the moment everything clicked. So this was why the original owner had ended up hospitalized. This group of bullies was behind it. I was done playing along. I shoved his grimy hand away. Then I got up slowly, brushed the dust off my clothes, and told them flatly that I was busy. I suggested they stop wasting their time on this and spend it training instead. The entire classroom went tense. The red-haired delinquent completely lost it and threatened to kill me. The other students gasped. Everyone seemed sure I was finished. He glared at me with pure hatred and began chanting a spell fast. Students scrambled and scattered. Not one of them stepped forward to intervene. Only I stayed exactly where I was, completely calm. Seeing that I showed no fear only made him angrier. He released a flame burst. At the moment everyone was certain I was dead, I moved. I drew the sword at my hip in a single motion. My mind instantly locked onto the form of the 8-sword style. The moment the technique activated, a razor-sharp sword wave tore through every last flame. The recoil from the strike sent the red-haired delinquent flying across the room. The students around me erupted in disbelief, saying I had completely transformed in just 1 month. They couldn't wrap their heads around how an F-rank had just taken an A-rank's attack head-on. The red-haired delinquent crashed to the floor and just stared, completely dumbfounded. He muttered in disbelief that it was impossible. Something had to have gone wrong. Refusing to accept it, he screamed at me not to underestimate him. He struggled to get back on his feet and come at me again. Then a clear, sharp voice cut through the room. It was Azure Warrior, an A-rank and a descendant of the 4 great heroes. Her presence instantly drew every eye in the room. The red-haired delinquent froze the moment he saw her. I looked at her, and something stirred inside me. She looked so much like my pink-haired companion from before. An excited student called out to Azure Warrior, asking if she had just returned from an overseas expedition. Azure Warrior ignored them and walked straight toward the red-haired delinquent. She called him out for using attack magic indoors, and for making sport of bullying classmates. She warned him that if he didn't stop right now, she would handle it herself. The red-haired delinquent shot a seething glare at both Azure Warrior and me, fuming with resentment. He could only call his crew together and storm out in frustration. Once they were gone, the other students crowded around Azure Warrior. They welcomed her back with excitement. Listening to them, I had already made up my mind. She was a descendant of my pink-haired companion. If that was the case, she was someone I could eventually talk to about the revival of the 6 dragons and the divine dragon. Meanwhile, the red-haired delinquent led his crew out to the school garden. The rage inside him refused to cool. He was humiliated, made to look weak in front of everyone. To vent his fury, he raised his hand and blasted the trunk of a nearby tree with fire. He screamed that he would kill both Azure Warrior and me for what we had done. At that moment, someone was watching from a high vantage point nearby, concealed in the shadows. He murmured to himself that he had only come to eliminate the descendants of the 4 great heroes, but it seemed I had some real skill after all. That figure was none other than the Fire Dragon's lieutenant, one of the 6 dragons' inner circle. A dark excitement rose inside him. He hadn't expected to stumble onto something this significant. A slow, crooked smile spread across his face. His decision was made. Since the Fire Dragon still needed time to fully revive, he would act in his master's place and eliminate every potential threat before the time came. With his mind made up, he dropped silently down into the garden. He set his sights on the strongest of the group, the red-haired delinquent. The Fire Dragon's lieutenant gave a light, deliberate clap. He smiled and praised the twisted obsession and hostility radiating from the red-haired delinquent, said it was perfect. The red-haired delinquent tensed and stared at this stranger who had appeared from nowhere. He could feel the immense mana radiating off the man. The Fire Dragon's lieutenant gave a slight bow and introduced himself, a loyal servant of the great Fire Dragon, Lord of Flame, one of the 6 dragons. He made it clear he had appeared because he needed the red-haired delinquent's help with something. Before the words had finished, he shot out a hand and grabbed him. He forced his own mana directly into the red-haired delinquent's body, and at the same time, he burned a cursed mark into him. His crew watched him slump to the ground and were too terrified to move. When the red-haired delinquent rose again, he was no longer himself, a mindless monster in human skin. His crew panicked and tried to run, but the next second, the corrupted red-haired delinquent went berserk and cut every one of them down. The Fire Dragon's lieutenant watched it all and smiled, a smile that didn't belong on a human face. He muttered under his breath that the pawn was ready, and it was time to move. Meanwhile, all the students had gathered at the location of a C-rank gate. The teacher explained that today's practical exam would be held here. Students could go solo or form teams, but taking down at least 5 5 monsters inside the dungeon was the minimum to pass. Thinking back to the mana test I had watched that morning, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Could they really handle a practical exam at that level of strength? But worrying wouldn't help. Sticking to my own plan was the smarter move. I walked over to Azure Warrior and thanked her for earlier. She waved it off with an easy laugh and told me not to worry about it, and that if I ever ran into trouble again, I could come to her. Looking at her straightforward manner, I thought, that bold, direct spirit was exactly like my pink-haired companion back then. And now, 100 years later, had the descendants of the 4 great heroes all found happy, peaceful lives? If so, I was genuinely glad for all 4 of my old comrades. What I didn't know was that Azure Warrior was turning something over in her mind at that very moment. She had noticed what I used that morning wasn't magic at all, and the red-haired delinquent hadn't simply fumbled his chant. She suspected my technique was pure swordsmanship, and to cancel a flame burst, the IAI strike would have had to be executed at breathtaking speed to generate that kind of shockwave. An execution like that would be difficult even for an S-rank magic swordsman, and the only one who could have pulled it off was perhaps the legendary sword saint who had once fought alongside her great-grandmother. I gave her a smile and a wave, reminding her that the exam had already started. She had no choice but to push the questions down and wait for another chance. Once inside the gate, an orc monster appeared directly ahead of the group. A few students charged in without thinking and unleashed attacks that did nothing. The orc swung its massive weapon. A single blow sent one panicked student crashing to the ground. The orc raised its weapon again, aiming for the killing blow. At the last possible second, I got there. One clean strike, and the orc was finished. The students around me were stunned, saying I was a completely different person from the one who had left a month ago. I crouched down beside the student who had fallen and told him, when engaging a monster, always maintain a safe distance first. I sighed inwardly. Just as I had feared, these students were nowhere near ready for real combat. I needed to wrap up this exam as quickly as possible, and then find a way to connect with the guild's stronger members. Then something shifted in the air around me. I followed the disturbance to a section of the dungeon where monster corpses were scattered across the ground. I traced the trail with my eyes, and a familiar figure came into view. It was the red-haired delinquent, but something was wrong. One look and I knew his condition was deeply off. He heard me and turned slowly. His eyes were hollow and wild at the same time. He had lost all reason. He came at me in a frenzy. I could tell immediately. His mana had been forcibly amplified and his movements were completely unnatural. Was he being controlled? His flesh was rotting all over his body, bones exposed through the wounds. Was he feeling no pain at all right now? Then what in the world had turned him into this? While those questions were still running through my mind, the red-haired delinquent suddenly spoke, barely a whisper soaked in despair. Just 3 words. Save me. My chest seized. Memories from the past came flooding back in an instant. The friends who had fought beside me in my previous life, the brutal images of them falling one by one, and through my expanded senses I felt it. The agony of having mana forced into him, his mind hijacked against his will. Without a second's hesitation, I activated the purification within me. A gentle golden light wrapped itself around the red-haired delinquent, and in an instant, the cursed mark on his neck was gone. The moment it vanished, he went limp and collapsed. He came back to himself, and tears of regret rolled down from the corners of his eyes. I spun toward the shadows and roared at whoever was hiding there to come out. I moved the red-haired delinquent to a safer spot off to the side, then returned to the center and steadied myself. Soon, a displeased voice drifted out from the darkness. He complained that I had just broken a toy he had spent so much effort preparing, and that it seemed wiser to deal with me first before going after Azure Warrior. Then, with a twisted grin, he added, he was the executioner who had come to end me, and he launched his attack. I set my jaw, eyes sharpening. My wrist snapped, and I deflected with the blade. The Fire Dragon's lieutenant stared at me in stunned disbelief. Every bit of his magic had been cut apart. I spoke without warmth and laid it out plainly. The 6 dragons were close to fully reviving, but their dream of overthrowing this world would be broken by my hands. The Fire Dragon's lieutenant's expression darkened, and he said in a venomous tone that I had a lot of nerve. He declared that the first one to die here would be me. I weaved through his rapid series of attacks with ease. Then I exploded forward, closing the gap between us in an instant. I brought my sword into close range and engaged him directly. In the gaps between exchanges, I demanded to know, why go to such lengths to hurt people? The Fire Dragon's lieutenant let out a grating, ugly laugh. Because it was fun, he said. Finding he had no edge in close range, he put force into the next strike, knocked my blade aside, and created distance. He opened with another magical assault, and kept talking, savoring the war from 100 years ago. He boasted about how he used to set up escape routes for his human prey on purpose. He would let them believe they had a real chance of getting out. Then he'd appear right in front of them, once they had taken the bait, and savor every detail of the despair and terror on their faces. To him, that feeling was beyond anything else in the world. He went on to describe the screams of children being killed by their own mind-controlled parents, and he praised those screams as beautiful. Every word out of his mouth made my blood boil. I bit down hard and said nothing. He didn't care. He kept going, relishing every detail of his own cruelty. He raised his hand and summoned every monster from the depths of the dungeon to converge on our location. He waved his arms with excitement, and declared that once the divine dragon awakened, he would get to experience all of that again. So he would never allow me to get in the way of that great plan. He began condensing his mana again, charging up a powerful skill. This time, I didn't give him the chance to finish. The next second, I was right in front of him, and severed his arm. I looked at him with cold, flat eyes. My voice was full of contempt. I told him to shut his mouth. Every single word he said made me sick. The Fire Dragon's lieutenant screamed in pain and fury and hurled curses at me. Then, completely ignoring the agony of his severed arm, he came at me in a frenzied assault. I sidestepped with ease and countered every strike with precision. Every ounce of force he threw at me was neutralized. Seeing this, the fire dragon's lieutenant completely snapped. He shrieked over and over that humans were born to be hunted, nothing but worthless refuse. He charged up his most powerful mana technique. He screamed at me to stop pushing my luck. The next second, a storm of meteors carrying the scent of annihilation came crashing down toward me. I frowned hard. Was this lunatic trying to blow up the entire dungeon? If that hit, every student in here would be caught in it. I activated the 8-sword style on the spot. I swung my blade and carved out a brilliant wave of sword energy. In an instant, every single meteor was shattered. The moment the last one broke apart, I thrust forward, blade aimed straight at his vital point. The fire dragon's lieutenant watched my technique play out, and his face went pale with shock. But before he could react, he was on the ground. After a moment, the wounded fire dragon's lieutenant started to laugh. He said that technique, only the man who annihilated the fire dragon's army could have used it. He called out my title, the Sword Saint. He said he had heard I died in the war, and asked if I had really reincarnated into this era. I looked at him without emotion. A man about to die didn't deserve an answer. The fire dragon's lieutenant let out a strange snicker, and then broke into wild, unhinged laughter. He called me the unluckiest man alive, going through all the trouble of reincarnating into this era, only to be destined to die here all over again. With that, he covered his face and laughed even harder. I snapped to attention the moment I saw it. The next second, his body began to twist and warp in ways that defied nature. He crowed that with the divine dragon on the verge of awakening, they had all been granted a new power. A cold alertness shot through me. I could feel it clearly. The mana around him was surging out of control. Jagged fangs tore through his jaw like something breaking through soil. Razor-sharp claws extended and kept growing. His whole body expanded and stretched, and the sound of bones fracturing and reforming out of place sent a chill down the spine, until at last he stood in his full combat form, grotesque and terrifying. I could feel it without question. His power had become something else entirely. He let out a bestial roar and came charging straight at me. I shifted to the side fluidly and evaded the first wave of his charge. He pressed forward with each thundering step of his massive claws, giving me no room to breathe. He cackled without stopping, screaming at me to look closely. This was the divine dragon's blessing in full effect.